This is the time period of the Ptolemies and the Seleucids from 323 to 168. They continue longer than that. The Ptolemies actually continued until the death of a famous queen. Anybody remember when that happened? No? Yes?
Is that Cleopatra?
Cleopatra.
Was that 120 something?
No, it's actually much later than that even. About 30 BC, when Cleopatra committed suicide. The Ptolemies continued on, but we're not going to focus on just the Ptolemaic period and just the Seleucid Empire. We're going to look at the influence over the land of Israel. Did everybody get one set? Make sure you have 4 pages. Is that an extra?
Yes.
Okay. So, just to glance through it real quick, we're going to look first at the control of Palestine by the Ptolemies, and that goes on for a number of years until, and a lot of back and forth, which we're going to take a look at some of that, until you get to the Seleucid, some of the incursions by the Seleucid Empire and some of the kings there. By the way, their kingdom, that empire, didn't last even as long as the Ptolemies did. But as far as their influence over the land of Palestine, that ends under Antiochus Epiphanes, the madman, the fourth, who would, of course, offer that sacrifice in the temple. As a result of the Seleucids and their heavy taxes and, of course, the abomination of desolations that take place in the temple, the children of Israel rebel. I guess we call them the children of Israel. The people of the land rebel, and, of course, the Maccabeans, they rebel against Antiochus IV. That takes place on page 4. If you see that, the Maccabean revolt, 168, 167 BC, and you can read about that in the Apocrypha. The Apocrypha is filled with stories about this time period. First Maccabeus, second Maccabeus, so on. You'll read about this rebellion by an old priest named Mattathias. So anyway, that continues on for a number of years until about 135. And in 135, the last of the sons of this old priest in this rebellion, the last of the sons is killed. And a family of priests of the family of Hasmon takes over. And for a number of years, you have the Hasmonean dynasty that rules over the land of Israel. And so that's where this section that I have in the handout is going to end. And then we'll get into the Hasmonean, what's known as the Hasmonean dynasty. Turn, if you would, in your Bibles to Daniel chapter 11. Daniel chapter 11. The book of Daniel is, as we've mentioned before, a wonderful book on prophecy. If you like prophecy, if you've studied prophecy, we haven't done much around here as far as prophecy conferences and so on, but I've been in those before. I enjoy prophecy. It's kind of it's like a mystery book. You're trying to figure out what these things mean, and I'm not saying that they're the most important thing for us, but God obviously gave us prophecy. And he intends for us, I believe, to know some things about the future. And so the book of Daniel has a lot of prophecy. In fact, it's probably more specific. And this section in Daniel chapter 11 is as specific as it gets about events in the time period that we're going to be talking about today. There's a lot of misunderstanding about the book of Daniel having to do with the 70 weeks, and if you want to read about that, I'm sure you could read about that in the writings of Charles Taz Russell and so on, and not just him, the Millerites and all of these guys that, yes, Joel, he's starting a new cult, the Millerites. So, right along with the termites. So, yes.
Anybody wants to join?
Right. If you want to join his cult, go on Schoology, and you can join his cult there. So he has an access code for you. So, but anyway, if you want to read about their misunderstanding, there you go. But the book of Daniel is a very, very specific book in its prophecy. Daniel chapter 7 through chapter 12. The most specific of these 6 chapters is chapter 11. And it has to do with the Ptolemaic Empire and the Seleucid Empire crossing back and forth through the land of Israel. Now, Daniel, the book, Daniel the prophet, is much criticized for being so specific. Literally, to the point where the critics of the Bible believe that Daniel, who wrote Daniel chapter 7 through 12, was a different Daniel than the Daniel of Daniel chapters 1 through 6. Because they say that it had to have been somebody who lived through these experiences and was writing about them as history, not as prophecy, because they're so specific. Okay, well, I believe that God is able, right, to have these men, prophets, write specifically about events. Okay, not only does Daniel have details about this, but the writings in the Apocrypha do as well. I said that those are the only 2 original sources, didn't I? Sorry. Some of the original sources are right here as well. These are actually the only original source. I said that a little bit wrong, but anyway, in Josephus as well, he talks about this time period and gives a lot of interesting things. Let me just I had this book up in the library. Did anybody use this, or does anybody have their own copy of Josephus? Okay, very good. Let me just point out a couple things here in the content page. From the death of Alexander the Great to the death of Judas Maccabeus. That is the section that you have, the handout that you have. Almost exactly. The death of Alexander the Great, the division of his kingdom into 4 parts, and then to the death of Judas Maccabeus. Judas is the 3rd son of Mattathias in the Maccabean revolt. So let me just take you there real quick. I'll point out a couple things. It starts on page 308. How Ptolemy, the son of Lagus, took Jerusalem and Judea by deceit and treachery and carried many of the Jews thence and planted them in Egypt. Okay, so that's how it starts. That's the original Ptolemy. And he took Jerusalem and Judea by deceit. Chapter 2 then, how Ptolemy Philadelphus, another Ptolemy, procured the laws of the Jews to be translated into the Greek tongue and set many captives free and dedicated many gifts to God. Okay, so he translated the laws into the Greek tongue, on and on. That's a long chapter. 5-6 pages. How the kings of Asia honored the nation of the Jews and made them citizens of those cities which they built. This is the Seleucids now, talking about some of the Seleucian kings and so on. Okay? How Antiochus made a league with Ptolemy. And the Bible talks a lot about that in Daniel chapter 11. So the book of Josephus is very helpful in understanding this time period. Is it accurate completely 100%? Probably not. Do we know which parts are true and which ones are not? We don't. Sorry, I never met Josephus. Okay? I have questions about his character, as I would imagine that you probably do as well, especially if you wrote a paper about him. Who wrote a paper about history of Josephus? So that's another option for you that haven't written on that yet. can't write the same paper twice, by the way. I just want to make that clear as well. So, but anyway, so we don't know that everything in it exactly right, but there's no question that what he said, many of the things that he relates can be verified. The way he describes certain things that we know gives us the indication that he knew what he was talking about generally. One thing specifically, just to give you an example, is he talks a lot about the city of Jerusalem and how it looked in the days that it was destroyed by the Romans in 70 A.D. And there's a lot of indication that the city of Jerusalem actually looked that way. He described, its beauty and so on. He described the locations of buildings in the city of Jerusalem. And those things can, some of those things can be verified with foundations and so on like that. So he seems to be accurate in those cases, so we can say that probably most of the other things that he talks about have a good bit of truth in them. They didn't exaggerate too much. A lot of the ancient historians were known for exaggerating things. In armies, they had millions of people on a battlefield. Well, some of that is almost logistically impossible. But anyway, it's believed generally he's pretty accurate. Same with the writings of the Apocrypha, that there's a lot of things in there that there's no way to verify, but because of other things in there, you can kind of say, well, it's probably mostly true. Okay, in Daniel chapter 11, Daniel is prophesying, and let's start in verse 2. And now will I show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the fourth shall be far richer than they all. Now, Daniel, remember, is still alive, according to this. He says there's going to be 3 more kings of the Persians. And then, who's going to come after that? Alexander. The fourth shall be far richer than all, and his strength through the riches, by his strength through the riches, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. A mighty king shall stand up, Alexander. And goes on, verse 4, and when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken and shall be divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, and not to his posterity. He didn't have children to pass it on to. He probably had children, but not old enough to give it to. By the way, Alexander, as we mentioned, he covered the world, the known world, in about 8 years. From Greece to India is about 11,000 miles in 8 years. Okay, that's the distance of across the United States, 3.5 times. Okay? So he had no posterity, nor according to his dominion which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up, even for others beside those. And the king of the south, Egypt. The Bible talks often about the south, going down into Egypt. Abraham went south in the land of Canaan, and he came into Egypt. And Jacob, the same thing. The king of the south is Egypt. King of the south shall be strong, and one of his princes, and he shall be strong above him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. Now, that could be about anybody, right? Now, before I read through a lot of this, let me just say, there's no way for us to be able to positively say, that guy with the big dominion, that had to be a certain guy. We don't know that. But we're not trying to say, and I don't believe that prophecy necessarily is generally intended to say, that is definitely this situation. If the Bible story fits the events that are taking place, then you can look at them and say, that's probably what that was. Okay, there's nothing wrong with not being, to me, I don't believe there's anything wrong with being definite in your prophecy. That has to be this person, or that has to be this time in certain cases like this. And you get into, the end times and so on. I think there's a lot of that is more clear because there's a lot more prophecy than there is here just in one chapter about this time period. Verse 3, and in the end of years they shall join themselves together for the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement, but she shall not retain the power of the arm, neither shall he stand nor his arm, but she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and he that begat her, and he that strengthened her in these times. Whew. Confusing. Now, I'm not looking to stand here and tell you all that this means. I'm just giving you a taste to help you see the king of the south, the king of the north, their daughters are talked about a lot. Their agreements that they made back and forth. That's a constant among the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. It's a constant. Daughters. There's all kinds of women mentioned, as we'll see here in a second. Women mentioned in the line of the Ptolemies. And, of course, Cleopatra down towards the end. The king of the north, the king of the south. You'll see that a lot as we talk about this. His sons, his daughters. Let's go down, verse 13. For the king of the north shall return, shall set forth a multitude greater than the former, shall certainly come after certain years with a great army and with much riches. And in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south. Also the robbers of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish a vision, but they shall fall. So the king of the north shall come and cast up a mount, and take the most fenced cities. A siege. Arms of the south shall not withstand. Anyway, so you get the idea. Kings of the north, kings of the south, daughters and sons, back and forth constantly. Okay, any comments on that? I mean, it's just the fact that it talks a lot about these kings going back and forth, and it mentions a lot of detailed events. By the way, I say that we don't positively know what these events mean. We do have opinions, okay? If you go through the prophecy of the book of Daniel, which I have taken a class on it, and I've read a decent amount about it, I think it's very possible that a lot of these things are specific Ptolemies. They had a daughter who did these things, and they intermarried, by the way, literally intermarried the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. They intermarried their kids off to try to establish peace, and on and on. So I believe that these probably do fit with actual names that we know in this time of history. Okay, let's go to our notes. Ptolemies controlling Palestine, 323 to 198. What is that, about 125 years of Egyptian control? By the way, Ptolemies, they're outsiders, right? What nationality? They're Macedonian or Greek. They have the Greek culture. They're not necessarily, I guess they'd be Macedonian. No, I don't think so. But they have the Greek culture nonetheless. And they're coming into Egypt, and they're spreading, they're influencing Egypt. Now, you know Egypt. Egypt is a hard nation. They've been there for, 2,000 years longer than Greece had been at this time. They've been there for a long time. And here come these Greeks, and they influenced the Egyptians, and the Egyptians accepted it. It's interesting. First group to maintain any real consistent control of Palestine after the death of Alexander was the Ptolemies, who ruled from the land of Egypt. His friend Ptolemy became satrap of Egypt, started to behave himself rather independently, and so on. Egypt, they began their independence under their dynasty of the Ptolemies. He accepted this royal title in 306. There would be 14 kings of this dynasty, all of them called Ptolemy. The first down through the list. Well, there's not 14 of them because you have some Cleopatras thrown in there as well. A remarkable aspect of the Ptolemaic monarch was the prominence of women. 7 queens named Cleopatra and 4 Berenices, or Berenices. I'm trying to make it plural there. Who rose to power when their sons or their brothers were too young, which is, of course, very unique in antiquity. Another intriguing aspect was the willingness of the Ptolemies to present themselves to the Egyptians as native pharaohs. We're native. We are Egyptian, when they really weren't Egyptian. They're Greek coming into Egypt, and the Egyptians accepted them, and the Ptolemies they both gave, the Ptolemies said, we are Egyptian like you. For the most part, they were good to their Jewish subjects, although they taxed them quite heavily. So this is the Jews in the land of Palestine, land of Israel. They taxed them, and of course, through that, controlled the land of Palestine. Now, with all of the crossing back and forth through the land of Israel, battling the Seleucid Empire, if you look at secular records, Josephus, of course, would be secular, but he kind of leans more towards from the Jewish perspective. He himself was a Jew from the Jews' perspective. But I'm saying if you go outside the Jewish perspective, all you'll see is the Seleucid Empire and the Ptolemaic Empire battling back and forth, and the Jews are this little, basically a footnote. And of course, we believe that God had placed the Jews in the center of his plan, and so we see it from the Jewish perspective, from the biblical perspective. Ptolemy I, known, and I'm not going to go through every single one of these, but Palestine came under the dominion of the Ptolemies during this first Ptolemy. He relocated many of the Palestinian Jews to the land of Egypt, where their native I lost my place. Where Greek soon became their native language. A lot of Jews moved to the land of Egypt. There is a huge amount of Jewish influence in the land of Egypt. There was, I should say. I don't know exactly, we don't know exactly when the Elephantine colony was established. But that was a colony of Jews in southern Egypt. But there's also plenty of other references to Jews in libraries, ancient libraries in Egypt. So there was a lot of Jewish influence. But the Greek became, of course, their native language through the influence of the first Ptolemy. The second one is Philadelphus, the son of the first. Under his rule, the Jews in Egypt and Palestine enjoyed a lengthy period of quiet, some degree of prosperity. Okay, now that's maybe if chapter 11 is somewhat in chronological order, which prophecy doesn't have to be, then it definitely does seem to fit. In verse 5, the king of the south shall be strong, and his prince, he shall be strong above him, have dominion, his dominion shall be great dominion. At the end of the years, he shall join themselves together. King's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement, so on. I've not gotten to that point yet. Some degree of prosperity. These first several Ptolemies were more concerned with intellectual pursuits than with military matters. If you know anything about the early Greek influence in Egypt, their emphasis was on learning and intellect. The establishment of the city of Alexandria and the emphasis that they placed on learning. There's a huge library that was there in Alexandria for years. It was burned eventually, but it was there for many years. They put a very much of an emphasis on intellectual pursuits more than military matters. That definitely changed in a few years here against the Seleucid Empire. In Palestine, the high priest, aided by a council of priests and others, was allowed to rule as a political underlord of the Ptolemies. They paid their annual tribute, according to Josephus, of 20 talents, and they were left alone. All right, now we're in a time period in Israel where you're going to see people or you're going to see kings or rulers, at least, I have a hard time calling them kings, who are underlords. Let's think back to where this started. Okay, when they went into exile, they're under the Babylonians, they're under the Persians, they're under now the Greek influence. After this, they would have a brief period of independence with the Hasmonean dynasty, which was not even a legitimate dynasty because of the fact that they weren't from the tribe of Judah. And then after that, you've got the Romans over them. And the Romans have many levels of authority over the Jews. What are some of those levels? Okay, I'm not looking specifically for positions. How about names? So if you probably can't remember all the name or the positions. Who is the king over them? Sorry? Herod. And underneath, well, once he died, the Romans put several other positions, especially they split up Herod's kingdom into 3 kingdoms, and they split several more sections under Roman procurators in different positions like Pilate, Pontius Pilate, the Agrippas, Felix, and Festus. Well, some of those, was one of those was a Herod, no? No. Those are positions. Anyway, so children of Israel are now in the middle of a long period of time where they're underneath other countries. That's not going to change. In Egypt, the Jews are allowed to build synagogues to worship and study, and Alexandria soon became an influential Jewish center. There's a huge amount of evidence, as I read more about it, that the synagogues were actually started in Egypt. People have wondered for years, where did this... I've always felt that the synagogues probably started in Babylon. But there's not been evidence found of synagogues in Babylon. And there has been plenty of evidence found of synagogues in the land of Egypt. Alexandria became an influential Jewish center, important to remember. Under the rule of Ptolemy II, the Jewish scriptures were translated into the Greek language. Now, some of this is not true. I should have changed that. I don't believe that anymore. The Jewish scriptures translated in the Greek language is a translation known as the Septuagint, which is a translation which became the most popular version of the scriptures among the Jews of the dispersion. That last phrase, I have a hard time believing. I've kind of changed my mind on that. I always thought that Jesus used the Septuagint to quote from, and I have a hard time accepting that. He used, I believe, the ancient Hebrew, and then translated that, not translated, but spoke that in the Greek. Anyway, but it is during this time that the Septuagint, which is a literal translation of the Hebrew Bible into the Greek, that was written. All right. Now, that's not where the Ptolemies, obviously not where they stopped ruling. But we're going to jump now. There's rule over the land of Palestine by Antiochus I, 280 to 262. General Seleucus, the original one of the 4 under Alexander, he was murdered, and his son Antiochus I took the throne. 5 years later, his empire was invaded by the second Ptolemy. This war lasted almost 4 years. Neither side won a decisive victory over the other. The next, Antiochus II. This man succeeded his father to the throne, and war breaks out between the 2 halves of the empire. 252, a peace agreement was finally reached. Neither side is able to defeat the other. Complicate matters even further. As part of the peace agreement, Ptolemy II's daughter, Berenice, was given in marriage to Antiochus II. Oh, yes. So here's the first of these things, where the the daughter of the south and the son of the northern king in the Seleucid Empire are given in marriage. At about the same time, both of the parents died, Ptolemy of the Philadelphus and Antiochus II. The former, Ptolemy, was succeeded by Ptolemy III. There you have his name. I won't try to pronounce it. And the latter was succeeded by his son, Seleucus II. So you have Antiochus and Seleucus back and forth, and these get very confusing if you're not careful. War breaks out between the two parts of the empire. Why? Oh, I love it. Laodice, or Laodicea, if you remember that. It's a name common in this time period, or it will become common. Laodice, the half-sister and also the wife of Antiochus II, wanted her son to take the Seleucid throne rather than the son of Berenice. So she had Berenice and her infant son killed. And of course, the Ptolemies aren't going to like that. Laodice is from the northern kingdom, and Berenice is from the southern kingdom. So the Ptolemies of the southern kingdom start a war, and it's known as the Laodicean War, caused by the wife Laodice, or Laodice. The Ptolemies are successful, managed to capture a large part of the Seleucid Empire, including all of Syria. For local problems, called him back to Egypt. With him no longer in the battlefield, Seleucus II managed to recapture much of his territory. He tried to capture Palestine, but was unable to do so, and peace was finally declared in 240. I don't have the passage written down here, but there's a scripture here in Daniel chapter 11 that actually talks about, I should find it. Oh, well. That actually talks about this fighting among the women. Speaking of fighting among the women, last night, that was too much. What did he say? Something about the women always. It's always the women, you know. So it's time to preach in here since we have all guys in here, you know. Right? I'm getting stares, angry stares. All right, Philopater. No, I'm not to that point. Number 6. Seleucus II was succeeded in 226 by Seleucus III. He reigned only 3 years before he was poisoned, succeeded by his younger brother known as Antiochus III. This is up in the north. So anytime you see Seleucus, anytime you see Antiochus, it's almost always in the northern. What's another name up there? Yes? Laodice. Whoops. Laodice. Those are northern names. Oh, as if you knew. Right? Is that what you're saying? And then in the southern part, we have, of course, the Ptolemies. And they go by different names. Then, of course, Berenice. You have that as well. And then Cleopatra. So as we're going through this, just try to keep in mind that we're going back and forth, okay? I'm using the south and the north, not because of our enjoyment of the subject, but because the Bible refers to them as the southern and the northern kings. Okay, Ptolemy IV Philopater in the year 221. The third died, and he's succeeded by the fourth, who is without a doubt the most cruel and vicious ruler of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Put a star next to that. He hated the Jews and persecuted them without mercy. He tried to force his way into the Holy of Holies in the Jewish temple and defile it. And they detested this madman and celebrated with great rejoicing at his death in 203 BC. So, pretty sad when you die. They don't throw you a funeral, they throw you a party. So, that's what happens here. All right, Ptolemy V Epiphanes or Epiphanes. Right? Who says Epiphanes? I've heard them both ways. He is called Epiphanes, the illustrious one. Sorry, I missed it. Oh. I always like to get in on the good ones here. All right, the illustrious one. That's what the name means, by the way. It has to do with a showing or some kind of a show. It means the illustrious one. He was a show. He's the last of the Ptolemaic rulers to hold control over Palestine and the people of Israel. He was not the last of their rulers, of course, 30 BC. In 198, the Seleucids under Antiochus III took control of Palestine, which control they held until the coming of the Romans in 63 BC. Now, we say it says there more or less, mostly less. That's very true because this time period from 198 to 63, that includes the rebellion by the Maccabean family. Okay, so anyway, the Seleucid Empire, from this point on, 198, until the Romans come, they're going to control the land of Palestine mostly. Mostly or lessly. Mostly less. Okay, any questions on that so far? So the Ptolemaic Empire mostly controlling the land of Israel until 198 BC. Okay, we move now to the Seleucids controlling Palestine from 198 to 168. That's what we're going to look at. A period of 30 years only. And finally the Jews are going to say, not all of them, it's just a few actually, who are going to say enough is enough. We looked at some of the rulers of the Seleucid dynasty who were contemporaries of the Ptolemies. Now are some of the Seleucid rulers who held control over Palestine, the people of Israel, after it passed into their hands from the Ptolemies. By the way, very soon after the Seleucid Empire is pushed off in the land of Israel, the Seleucid Empire crumbles. Okay? So from a purely secular perspective, historians say that the Seleucid Empire was on their way down, and that the children of Israel had very little to do with that. Well, I believe they did. I believe that God was using the Seleucid Empire and their weakening to still punish the Jews, and then the Jews kicked them off, and God said, enough of you. That's it. Okay, Antiochus III is known as the Antiochus the Great. He's the great Seleucid king who throws off the Ptolemaic control of the land of Palestine. Okay, so he's a great king. He's called Antiochus III the Great. He was only 18 years old when he ascended the throne of the Seleucid Empire in 223. Even though he was young, he was experienced in government as he had served as governor of the province of Babylonia under his brother Seleucus III, as a young man, as a teenager. He immediately began an effort to conquer the troublesome empire of the Ptolemies. Although he was unable to completely destroy them at the Battle of Panion, I believe that has to do with up in the north of Israel, what's the name of it? Bonius, there's I can't, sorry?
Bithynia? Is that Pontus Bithynia?
No, I'm thinking Caesarea Philippi, the Temple of Ponius. I believe it's close to there. But anyway, it's in the Jordan Valley. And they were able to throw off the control of the Ptolemies over the land of Israel. He gained complete control of Palestine in 198. And the Jews were happy for a little bit. The constant war between the two dynasties seemed finally to be at an end, and they welcomed Antiochus with open arms. And 30 years later, they threw them off pretty miraculously. Okay, so southern kings, northern kings fighting back and forth. They said, finally, we're going to have peace. There's a church out in Maryville, has a sign on it that says, pray for world peace. And I keep, every time I drive by, I say, don't they know their Bible? Peace, peace, and there is no peace. As long as there's sin and Antichrist in this world, we're going to have no peace. Little did they realize that the Seleucids would prove to be even harsher masters than the Ptolemies, even more harsh. Hannibal, who had been defeated by the Romans, this is just an interesting side note, fled to the court of Antiochus for protection. Interested in stirring up trouble for Rome, he convinced Antiochus to invade Greece, whereupon Rome declared war on Antiochus. And they defeated him in 190 BC and made him pay dearly for his alliance with Hannibal. That's the same Hannibal that you've read about in your storybooks. It's funny that name comes up here because just this weekend I saw an article where they think they have discovered the pass in the Italian Alps that he crossed. You'll have to read about it, how they discovered it. It's very, very interesting. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. You can look it up. It's pretty funny. Anyway, he was forced to pay enormous amounts of money, surrender his navy, his war advance. To ensure that Antiochus continued to make his payments, the Romans took his youngest son to Rome and kept him hostage for 12 years in Rome. That son would later return to the Seleucid Empire and become, you know it, the crazy one. The Romans, they probably gave him some kind of chemicals and turned him into a ADHD kid or something like that. Right, sent him to Fairhaven. Yeah, he hung out in our bedroom every Sunday. So, okay, now this is one of the first references, first interactions between kings in the Middle East and the great Roman Empire, which wasn't in existence yet as an empire. But this is a foolish thing to do, and you can't know that at the time. But this is the first time they're bringing the influence of Rome over into the Middle East. This is going to be a big problem, of course, as the Roman Empire is going to eventually take over. This is just the start. There's another huge blunder in 63 BC when the children of Israel actually do something really foolish. Children of Israel. I keep calling them that. It's hard to say what they were at the time. They were some Jews, I'm sure, there. All right, so anyway, this Seleucid ruler, this takes place during his reign. Seleucus IV, 3 years after the defeat by the Romans, Antiochus the Great, who was that Antiochus who liberated the Jews from the Egyptians, from the Ptolemies, he died, and he's succeeded by Seleucus IV, who ruled for the next 12 years. His situation was a precarious one. He had to come up with huge amounts of money to send to the Romans. To raise this money, he taxed the people of the land, including the Jews of Palestine. So this creates a moral dilemma for the Jews. Should we give money, huge amounts of money, to a foreign heathen government? Now, this question is a legitimate question. I know it's easy for us to say, oh yeah, they should give their money to the government. They should pay their taxes. Well, that's easy for us to say because we have Jesus already giving us that illustration. He pulls out the fish, pulls the money out, says, give this to the government, to that same Roman government. We have Romans chapter 13. Okay, so we have some things where, and people still think it's wrong to pay taxes to the government. But we have these examples. They didn't have that. And so this is a lingering question. And it really, I guess it's not settled in many people's minds when Jesus did what he did, but it's really not settled until Jesus himself said, give this money to the government. It has Caesar's name on it, face on it, give it to the government. So anyway, this is an interesting question, but at the time it was very legitimate. Two opposing factions formed among the Jews. Two groups. Very important to understand these two groups. The Anniads, under the leadership of the high priest Ananias, were opposed to helping the Seleucids in any way. The other group, led by a man named Jason, felt the opposite, said about making many false slanderous reports to the king about the high priest, in the hopes of undermining him. Jason was the brother of Onias. Now, I don't know if he was a full brother, probably not. He was interested in only one thing, becoming the high priest in his brother's place. He hoped to accomplish this by offering the Seleucids large amounts of money. Okay, what are they doing? They're paying the Seleucid Empire, who is paying the Roman Empire. Okay, so here's the Jews fighting amongst themselves over really who's going to be the high priest, and they're deciding, they're using that money that they're getting to send to the Seleucid Empire, to gain favor with the Seleucid Empire. You can read about that in the Apocrypha and also Antiquities of the Jews in the writings of Josephus. King Seleucus, he ignored the Jewish squabble for the most part and refused to get involved in it. Of course, he liked their money. Okay, next, Antiochus IV. Antiochus IV. I want to at least get to the Maccabean revolt before I let you go today. Antiochus IV Epiphanes, 175 to 163. 175 BC, Antiochus IV Epiphanes, which it means the illustrious one, but it also has the wording of it for some reason has the meaning of a madman. They actually changed it as a play on the word epimames instead of Epiphanes, which means the madman. Anyway, he murdered the king and took the throne. He immediately took advantage of Jason's offer of money and removed Onias from the office of the high priest, installing Jason in his place. Okay, now here's where it gets just crazy. The Jews were trying to, certain leaders, certain high priests and their family members were trying to win favor with the Seleucid Empire, the Seleucid king. So they're killing each other and they're giving bribes and all kinds of stuff. What takes place here? Antiochus Epiphanes, he takes Jason's offer of money and removes Onias. 3 years later, another one named Menelaus or Menelaus offered Antiochus even more money. So the king removed Jason and made Menelaus the high priest. So in the process of about 4 years, you have 3 high priests, each of them outbidding the other. The Jews, who were still trying to be faithful to God, were infuriated by this state of affairs. Their hearts were pained that the position of high priest could be bought by the highest bidder. Those who were outspoken about these abuses were known as the pious ones, the Hasidim. The pious ones. These are the forerunners of some later pious ones. We'll see that a little bit later on. It's from this group that the Hasidic Jews of today trace their roots. In the year 169 BC, Antiochus invaded Egypt. Now remember, 169, in 168 is going to be the rebellion. So the year before the Maccabean revolt, in 169, he invaded Egypt. And you can read about this in a lot more detail in the writings of Josephus and in the Apocrypha as well. But, the actual details. This just is a quick summary of it. It was reported back in Palestine that the king, the madman, had been killed in battle. When the news reached Jason, who had been exiled, remember, he's not the high priest. He'd been outbid. He returned from exile and threw Menelaus out of the city and assumed the office of high priest. Oops, the news wasn't true. The death of Antiochus hadn't happened. When he returned to Jerusalem, by the way, if you read about the events that take, he's not coming back to Jerusalem to just stomp down and say, I'm going to make you listen to me. He's returning from battle. He's coming back, and he passes through Jerusalem, and he hears what they did and what they thought, that he had died. And he had lost, by the way, in the battle. He wasn't returning in peace. But he takes out his fury on the Jews. I'm sure there's more motive to this than just, that they were rejoicing at his death, the reports. So he removes Jason from office and puts back his own high priest, the other highest bidder. And he enters the temple, and he does a lot of things. By the way, when you read that he offered the pig on the altar, that's not all that he did. He came into the city, and he wanted to wreak havoc on these Jews that had been causing him all kinds of trouble and causing the Roman Empire, who he was now, he was more in connection with them than in the past. He entered the temple, stole a great deal of valuable treasure. Of course, they saw that as an abomination. Following year, he renewed his campaign against the Egyptians, but he was stopped by the Roman representative and was ordered to leave Egypt and never come back. This so infuriated him that he came back and he took out his frustration on the city of Jerusalem. Tore down some of the walls. He slaughtered many of the Jews. How many? Anybody know? These are numbers. We don't know, Josephus mentioned, not Josephus, the Apocrypha mentions numbers. We don't know for sure. But the Apocrypha says 80,000 Jews. Okay, we're not talking he killed, a few of the Jews to let them know he wasn't happy. He killed many thousands at least. He ordered the Jewish scriptures to be destroyed. Now that was he wanted to destroy the Jewish, this is there's a word I'm looking for and I can't find it.
Identity.
Their identity, thank you. He wanted to destroy the Jewish identity. That's why we have Jordan in the glass. He wanted to destroy their identity. He wanted to make them a non-factor, take away their identity where they, things that they believe and stand for. In order to do that, get rid of their scriptures. He and his soldiers brought prostitutes into the temple to defile the temple. He issued orders that everyone was to worship the Greek gods. He even established the death penalty for anyone who practiced circumcision or who observed the Sabbath or any of the Jewish religious feasts and sacrifices. Now, he imposed the death penalty for these things. You were caught sacrificing to Jehovah in the land of Israel. You'd be put to death. And now this didn't last long, but this is imposed upon them. It lasted for a couple of years at the very most until it was finally challenged and a huge rebellion because of that. But literally, any of the feasts, anyone who practiced certain, this is a rite of the Jews that they practice, and for them to say you can't do it or we're going to kill you is ridiculous. It was ridiculous. So here's, and you can read about this in I believe it's 2nd Maccabees. It might be 1st Maccabees, but anyway, it's in the Apocrypha. The cruelty of Antiochus enforcing these new laws against the Jews became legendary. I should have brought a copy of it with me. I have a copy of the Apocrypha. Anyway, an aged scribe by the name of Eleazar was flogged to death because he refused to eat the flesh of a swine. So obviously they're just picking fights, and they want to publicly force people to accept this. And they really push the issue. There's several other examples. In another incident, a mother and her 7 young children were butchered. Why? For refusing to worship an idol. So they literally brought out a family and put up an idol and said, worship this idol right here, right now, or you die. So they're pushing the issue and trying to bring this thing to a head. 2 mothers who had circumcised their newborn sons were driven through the city and thrown to their deaths from the top of a large building in Jerusalem. Okay? This kind of stuff happened a number of times. Antiochus just literally trying to push the issue. The final outrage for the pious Jews of the land came when Antiochus, can you imagine being a conservative, Bible-believing Jew? How furious you'd be at this stuff. And yet it didn't push them to say, we have to do something. We got to stop this. We're not going to keep on just, okay, whatever you tell us, okay. Finally, the final straw, he erected in the temple to the pagan god Zeus, he erected an altar. And on December 25th, 168, he offered a pig to Zeus on the altar of God. The Jews had taken all they're going to take, and the stage is set for a large-scale rebellion of the Jews against the Seleucid Empire. All right, the madman. Okay, we'll stop there.